Hello, so this is going to be a full start to end guide for setting up your AYN Thor. So what I've done is I have done a factory reset on my personal device. I'm going to take you through the entire setup process, beginning with some things you can do before the Thor has arrived. For example, making sure you've got the relevant files ready and setting up some folder structures. And then we're going to move over onto the Thor itself. We're going to install an app called Obtainium, which will handle the downloading and updating of our emulators and some extra tools and lovely stuff like that. Then we're going to go through each of the system emulators, make sure they're all set up as so they can take full advantage of the Thor. And then we're going to look at a front end. So the front end that I've chosen in this case is IISU, which is a very good looking front end, inspired a lot by the DS and 3DS. And I know it's one that people are eagerly anticipating. So it is now in a state where it is usable as a day-to-day front end. And then finally, we're going to look at just some little tips and tricks that you can enable, completely optional, just something to make the Thor even better than it already is. So this is going to be completely beginner friendly. By all means, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. It's going to be quite a long video, so to borrow a phrase, you'll want to grab yourself a snack and drink, or maybe a couple. There will be chapters, so if you're halfway through a setup, please feel free to jump to the necessary chapter and then pick up from there. Just a side note as well, a lot of these files are copyrighted, so I can't give you direct links. However, I can give you the file names that I'm using, in which case you can use the magic of the internet to locate your own copies, or you can dump your own hardware files from your systems if you have them and know how to do that. And also, I do have an SD card, but I will be doing everything using the internal storage. The only difference being is some of the file paths. However, most of it is handled by the setup guides, so they'll ask you to point which folder do you want to use. So I'm assuming we'll be using internal storage. So enough of me waffling, let's get started. Okay, so firstly, we're going to go through some prerequisite stuff. So we're going to set up some folders, we're going to set up some accounts, and then we're going to get some BIOS files ready. So when your Thor does finally arrive, you've got everything to make the rest of the setup as streamlined as possible. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a folder on my desktop that I'm going to call Thor. So if you've got an SD card already, you can do this straight on your SD card. However, for the sake of this recording, I'm just going to be using my internal storage on the device. So all of this will refer to my internal storage. So inside this Thor folder, we're going to need to set up a few basic folders. So firstly, we're going to need our ROMs folders. So our ROMs folders is our games folder. Now, some front ends require a very specific way for the folders to be named. So what some guy on the internet, what's his name? Retro Game Core? Whoever he is, he has created a template based on one of the front ends, ESDE, Emulation Station Desktop Edition, my personal favourite. That uses a very strict folder structure for your systems. So rather than us manually making millions of folders, we can just use this template and it's going to make our lives infinitely easier. So what I'll do is I will copy the link. All the links will be in the description. And then we're going to go to our browser. We're just going to pop in that link. So this is GitHub. So for those of you who are not familiar with GitHub, GitHub is a way for nerds like myself to work on projects together and upload codes and scripts and things like that. So we are going to require an account for this, and I'll explain why shortly. But for now, we're only going to worry about downloading this folder structure. So if you're not familiar with GitHub, a lot of the pages will look like this. So you'll see the name of the project that you're on, what files it contains. There's some documentation here, usually with some setup instructions like there is here. Or on the right-hand side, you'll see some releases. So this is primarily what we're interested in. So we're going to click into that. And then you'll see there's some instructions here. And then there's some files down here. So we don't need to worry about the source code files, so you can ignore those. We just need this roms.zip folder. So this is just an empty folder full of folders, essentially. So now that's downloaded, I'm going to go to my downloads folder. I'm going to extract the zip folder. And then as you can see, here it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that ROMs folder over to my Thor. And then I'll just get rid of those. So if we open this up, we can see it's got 3DO, Amiga, Atari. It's got 180 different system folders in here. So it's, imagine doing them all manually. Take you years. But you've got the time because you're still waiting for your Thors to arrive. So this is going to be the basis. So when we cover dragging our games in, these are the folders we're going to drag them into per system. So we're going to leave that for now. And then next, I'm going to make a folder called BIOS. So what a BIOS is a system software in a nutshell. So if you remember back to the PS1, PS2 days, when you put a disc in and turn the machine on, you'd get the system logo, and you'd get, I think on the PS2 you get these big blue cubes, and the PS1 you'd get that lovely kind of Sony interactive triangle. And basically for some emulators, these are absolutely necessary. They will not work without them. For most of them, it's all down to compatibility. Some games run better if they have them. However, for the most part, you don't need them except for specific systems. BIOS files are copyrighted. However, I can tell you the files names I use, I just can't link to them directly. So, firstly, for the BIOS files, I'm going to make a couple of folders in here. So I'm just going to do PSX, PS2, and a certain Nintendo console, which people don't like saying the name of for fear of copyright strikes. If you have eyes, you can see it there. So, firstly, for our PSX, we're going to want a file called PSX on PSP 660. So I already have a copy of it. Like I said, I can't show you where to get it. However, the magical internet will show you. So what I'm going to do is just drag it in here. So this is the file you need. And then I'm just going to pop it in my PSX folder. Next up, for the PS2, the file I'm using is scph-70012.bin. So that's this file here. So again, if you just search for those file names, there's tons of resources and links out there. I recommend the ROMs subreddit if you're a Reddit user. There's absolutely tons of information on there. It's very, very helpful for getting a lot of these set up. Now, for that secret console of Nintendo's, we're going to need a firmware file, which is the system software file, and we're going to need what's called the prod keys file, which is basically a list of all the keys for the individual games. So for the firmware file, I'm using firmware 21.2.0. You can leave this in the zip folder, you don't need to unzip it. I'm going to drag that into that cheeky little folder there. And then for the prod keys folder, I just need to extract that one. So I have the prod keys and the title keys. For the system I use, you only need the prod keys. So I'm just going to drag that over to there. And then finally, there is also a pack for Retroarch. So this is one of the emulators we'll be using, which will handle the majority of the systems. So Retroarch is basically, it's not an all-in-one, it's a most-in-one. So any of your classics from Atari all the way up to kind of PlayStation 1, N64, it will handle for you. However, for certain devices or for certain systems, there are better external solutions which we'll cover. So Retroarch does have a BIOS pack, so you can just look online for Retroarch BIOS pack. I have it here. So what I'm going to do is extract the folder, and I'll just drag the whole thing over. This one isn't essential as such, but it can make some games run marginally better. So it's entirely up to you. There are certain systems that I won't cover in great detail. For example, the Dreamcast, the Sega Saturn, that they do require BIOS files, but we run them through Retroarch, and it's all contained in here. By the way, if any of this is confusing to you, please drop a comment below. I'm always replying to comments and trying to help people out, so I'm aware that if you're a complete beginner, a lot of this might be quite overwhelming. So by all means, take your time with this video. Don't rush into it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's a lot of people in the community that will help you out as well. Like I said, there's the Reddit subreddit. There's all sorts of resources online available to help you. Never be afraid to ask for help. So I've got this Retroarch v 1.10.1. So I'm just going to drag that whole thing in just for my BIOS. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab some games and then we'll set up some of our games folders. Okay, so I've got myself some games. So I have a home server where I host all my game files. You'll have to find your own using the power of the internet again. Again, these are copyrighted, so you can either use your own personal files that you've ripped off your own CDs or cartridges, or you can have a look online and sail those seas. You know what I mean? And I think you do. So I'm not going to copy every game over because we'll be here all day. So just as an example, so a lot of these folders use abbreviations. Most of them are quite obvious. For example, GB is Game Boy, GBA, Game Boy Advance. Some of them a little bit less so. So GC is GameCube, rather than just using GameCube, not sure why. And so rather than 3DS, we have N3DS. So again, these are the emulation station names. You don't have to use these names. However, I do advise it because if you try out different front ends, if IISU isn't your sort of thing, it's better to keep those files in the same structure, just so when you're moving them back and forth, it just makes things infinitely easier. So what I'll do is I'll copy a couple of Game Boy games, or just grab a few, and then, so from my GB folder, I'm going to copy them over to the GB folder that I made earlier. And the same with GBA. So file types can be essential at this point. So most of your classic systems, you can just have the files zipped, because when we use Retroarch, it will look inside the zip files. Not every system does that, and I'll cover that shortly. Game Boy Color, we'll grab a few of those. So GC, so our GameCube folder. So these, you'll notice they're not zip files, they are RVZ files. So that is a special type of file for the emulator Dolphin. It's basically, it's a copy of the disc, but it's compressed, so it takes up a lot less space than a full disc rip would. So what I'm going to do is I'll just get a couple of these and I'll copy them over to the GC folder. Same for Genesis. Most of these will probably end up being different versions of the same game, but we'll see how we get on. And then what have we got next? We've got N64. So DS is NDS, so I don't have any games in there, so don't worry about that. I'll make sure I've got some ready for the DS emulation part of the setup. NES is the NES. Make sure you remember the alphabet before you do this. I tend to forget it. PS2, pretty straightforward. So these are CHD files. So similar to the RVZ files, these work for PS1, PS2, and PSP. So again, they're a lot smaller than an ISO file, which is a copy of the actual disc. So if you want to save as much space as you can, if you've only got a limited disk space, then I advise doing it this way. There are tools out there to convert ISOs to CHDs. I'll cover those in a separate video, just because I don't want to overwhelm you more than I already am. So we'll grab the first few of them. There we go. So there is a PS3 folder, so I won't be covering PS3 today, and I won't be covering PS Vita, because I do have separate videos for them. PS3 emulation is in such an early stage, it's hard to get any game running to an acceptable level. So I wouldn't advise trying to run them off your floor. It is possible in the loosest terms imaginable. Vita has a slightly better success rate, but still, it can be quite finicky. But there are separate videos on my channel, so give a like, give a subscribe, and check out my other videos. However, just for this all-in-one guide, I won't be covering PS3 or Vita. So sorry if they were the two systems you were really hoping out for. PSP, we'll grab a few of those. So as you can see, these are CHD files as well. And then the SNES. So when I've got acquired games and stored them on my server or my PC, I like matching the folder names to the ones I use. So wherever I'm emulating my games, whether it's on a Thor, on my PC, on a Raspberry Pi, I always try to make sure I have that consistency. So if you're someone who uses multiple devices, then you want a consistent format. It just makes your life infinitely easier, especially when you're copying whole folders across. So I'll grab a few of these from a little bit further down, just so we hopefully actually see some different games rather than the same ones. And have I got any more? Okay, so for this particular console, the secret one, these files are NSP files. So some of you might come across NSZ files, which are smaller. They are not supported by the emulator Eden, which I'll be covering today. So if you come across those, there are converters available online. I will be covering them in a separate video. So if you can get NSP files, get NSP files. So I'll only copy a few of these because they are quite chunky. I'll grab some of the smaller ones. Be here all day otherwise. So just a note on this console in particular, not all of the games work. However, most of them, for me, have been fine. Some of them run great, some of them not so great. However, usually playable. And then we've got Wii. So I'll just get Super Mario there. And Wii U. Okay, where I don't know where my Wii U ones have gone. I'll have them in time for the Wii U part of the setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this finish, and then to wrap up this chapter, I'm going to show you some accounts that I recommend you have. They're not technically mandatory, but I really advise getting them. The base accounts, they're all free. Some of them have slightly premium tiers, which I'll explain when we cover it. However, I think they're essential. So I will see you in about 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Okay, so those have all copied over. So now we're going to cover some accounts I recommend you have. So firstly, like I mentioned before, you're going to want a GitHub account. The reason for this is when we switch over to Obtainium and we start downloading all the apps, if you don't have an account, you're going to hit a rate limit and you'll get a warning that says you downloaded too much, you're going to have to wait 30, 60 minutes. And after you've waited a month or 2 months or however long for your device to arrive, that 30 minutes, that's a killer. So we'll prevent that. So all you need to do is go to github.com and then you can just sign up. So I'm signed in here. And then from this account, we're going to need to set up a key. So if you go to your little profile, once you set it up, go to settings. If you scroll down on the left-hand side, you'll see this developer settings. We're going to click into that. On the left-hand side, you're going to see personal access tokens. We're going to want a fine-grained token. So this is basically a way for Obtainium to communicate with our GitHub account and say, yep, we're a real person, we're not a bot, let me download more, please. So I'll delete the one I've used before. I have to use my two-factor. Always make sure you set up two-factor wherever you can, just for security. So that should come through in a second. There we go. So we're going to generate a new token, and then all you need to do is for the token name, I'm just going to call it Obtainium, nice and simple. Expiration, you can set this to whatever you like. For this, as it's only for accessing the Obtainium side, I'm just going to put no expiration. But it's entirely up to you. And then leave it on public repositories, because these are public repositories that we're accessing. And then we're going to generate a token. Going to ask you to confirm, generate token, and then you'll see this key here. So what we're going to do is, what I advise doing is copying that to a text file just for easy access for when we get to setting up the Thor. So I want to copy that, and on my other screen, I'm just going to make a little notepad just for the keys. So I will be changing all these keys, by the way, so don't worry about security. I've learnt my lesson on all the videos where my censoring was terrible. So that's GitHub. So I'll delete that key for now. Or you've had a chance to write it down. The next thing we're going to cover is SteamGrid DB. So this is, some of the front ends use it. It's basically a way to get really nice, high quality artwork using your Steam account. So if you've managed to somehow go through life without having a Steam account, this is the point I advise setting one up. So we'll use the same tab actually. We'll go to steamgriddb.com. And then I'm already signed in, but if you go to the top right here, you'll see a little thing that says sign in with your Steam account, and then you can use the Steam Guard on your phone if you have that set up, or it will email you a code, or whichever security measure it requires to let you in. So similar to what we've just done is I'm going to go to my profile, to preferences, and then I'm going to click the API key, and I will censor this one because this is one that I actually do use. And then you'll see the API key for use of the API, and then what we'll do is I'll just copy that over to my little notepad for now. So you can access these on the device yourself, which I advise doing just because it's easy to copy and paste straight from the device. My Thor is currently hooked up to my computer to record from, so that's why I'm doing it this way. Next, we're going to cover Screen Scraper. So Screen Scraper is a scraping website. So what this does is when you come to set up your front ends, what it will do is it will scan your games and it will download all the nice artworks, the box arts, even the art that's on the disc or the cartridge, all sorts of stuff, gameplay videos. There's tons on there. It's excellent. So it's screenscraper.fr is the link. There we go. So this is a French website, so sometimes it does show up in French. So you can just register with this. Same username, password, that's all you need. You don't need any specific keys for this. However, there are tiers to this account. So the free tier gets you, I think it's about 1,000 requests a day. I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. You only get so many. So if you've got tons of games, it'll scrape so many, and then it'll say, whoa, 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 you're taking the mick now. Come back tomorrow. However, you'll see here there's some development cost things. So if you chuck them a few euros or a few dollars, you get access to way more stuff. So I threw in the 10 euros because I use it all the time. So you get 5 extra threads, which means that you can simultaneously scrape 5 games at a time. And I also get 100,000 scrapes. And in all my time of using emulators and using emulation, I've never hit that upper limit. So this is a must-have. Again, stick with the free tier. See how far you get. If you start hitting those thresholds, chuck them €1 or €2, and you'll get 10 times as much. Finally, and possibly my favourite, retro achievements. So if you're someone who has a PlayStation or has a Xbox and you get trophies or achievements, or you're kind of into that thing, then what retro achievements is it's the same sort of thing but for classic games. So what it'll do is it only works with certain copies of the game, so I'll explain how it works shortly. But it's a great way to really get maximum life out of those games. So I'm just going to, not sign up, I'm going to sign in. Is it going to auto-complete for me? No, it's not. Wonderful. I'm just going to sign in, and then I'll pick it up from there. Okay, so I've just signed in. So I use a password manager, and I've just set up my computer again, and I don't know what the actual password was, which is why the cut there. So this is Retro Achievements. So the way this works is you can browse the games that are available. So if I look at a PS2 game, and I can see, 007 Nightfire has 71 achievements available. I can open the game up, and then I've unlocked one because I only did the first level as a test. And then down here, you'll see supported game files. So if we click on that, you'll see this is the one we're looking for. So it will say it's the 007 Nightfire USA from the redump. So you can use the power of the internet to locate that file. And you'll also see this hash key. Now, a hash key is basically it's a unique identifier for that particular file. So it will only work if the file matches what it's looking for. So when we connect our emulators to Retro Achievements and you load up a game, it'll go, is that game on the Retro Achievements database? If it is, great. Retro Achievements can only be unlocked if your device is connected to the network, which is a bit annoying, and it's something that people have been asking for offline mode for ages. Hopefully it's something that does come to fruition in the near future, but for now, you have to make sure your device is connected to the network. So from this, some emulators you can just log in with your username and password. Some of them we require another API key. So if you hover over your little profile picture, go to settings, and then we'll scroll down, and once again, we have an API key. So I'll censor this one as well, and I've learned my lesson. So you could just click to copy, and then I'm just going to pop it in my little notepad for now. So yeah, so that's it for our prerequisite setup. So now I'm going to take a short break because I've been talking for a good while now. And when I come back, we're going to set up the AYN Thor. Okay, so the day has finally come. Your Thor has arrived. You've made sure you've got everything already set up as the earlier parts of the video instructed you to do so. So now we're finally going to get stuck in. So this is a completely fresh install of my AYN Thor. The only thing I've done is I've just enabled the developer option so I can actually screen record. But other than that, this is fresh as fresh can be. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up Chrome. I'm going to use it without an account for now. I'll sign all in to this later. So we're going to search for Obtainium. So like I mentioned at the start, Obtainium is an app which will allow us to keep our emulators, as well as download our emulators, keep them up to date for us. So it's this top link from Imran R98/Obtainium. We're going to open that up. We're going to scroll down. And like I covered, so this is just the web view or the mobile view of GitHub. So there's all the project files. We're only interested in this little releases here on the right hand side. So I'm going to tap that V1.3.4. And then if we scroll down, there's tons of different files. All we're looking for is this one that says apprelease.apk. Oh, not that one, the one above it. This one here. I'm going to tap that. I'm going to download it. Yep, download. So a lot of the time that you download things, you might get asked for some file permissions and stuff like that. So now that's open. I'm going to open it up. Yep, you're going to get this security thing. We're going to go to settings. I'm going to allow Chrome to install unknown apps. And then the Obtainium pop-up will show. We're just going to install Obtainium. Okie dokie. So before we load up Obtainium, we're going to need to get the RJNY emulation pack. So this is something that I have worked on my GitHub. It was set up by RJNY, and basically it's just a list of apps for Obtainium to keep an eye on for us. So we're just going to Google RJNY emulation. There you go, and you'll see at the top an Obtainium import file containing an Android emulation pack. That's the one we want. So if we scroll down, you'll see here in our releases, you'll see just what's been added. So I think this is one of my contributions actually. But you'll see there are 2 files here. We're only going to need one of them. So if you're using an AYN Thor, you'll want the dual screen pack, which has a few extra apps or a few different versions of apps. If you're using an Odin or a Retroid or another Android-based emulation device that's just single screen, just get the one that doesn't say dual screen. So we're just going to tap that top one to download the dual screen version. Okay, that's downloaded. And then we're going to swipe up from the bottom and we're going to load up Obtainium. We're going to like to send notifications. We're going to click OK, OK. So if you remembered when we set up our GitHub account and we created that access token, what we're going to do is we're going to go and if we go to settings and then scroll down to where it says GitHub personal access token here, it says increases the rate limit. So that's the part we want. So I'm just going to paste mine in and then I'll flip over back to the apps tab at the bottom. Okay, so I've got my access token in there. So I'm going to go back over to our app. So you can see at the moment, we've only got Obtainium. But we're going to need to import that file that we've just downloaded. So on the bottom tab where we see import export, we're going to tap that. And then you'll see this button, Obtainium import. So we're going to press that. And then you should see in our recent files at the top, that emulation pack that we just downloaded. We're going to open that up and you'll get this imported 40 apps and settings. So we'll go through and I'll just give you a brief overview of what each app does and which ones I'll be covering in today's video. Okay, so firstly, we have everything broken down into sections. So we have emulators, front ends, PC emulation, streaming, track only, and utilities. So we'll start with our emulators. So what we're going to do is PS3 is a PS3 emulator. Like I said, I won't be covering that for today. ARM-SX2 is a newer PS2 emulator. I won't be covering it. I'll be covering Nether SX2, which is further down. However, I have done a full PS2 setup guide video, which if you want more detail about ARM-SX2 or any of these emulators that I'm not using, please check my other videos. Azahar is going to be our 3DS emulator. It will be the one I cover today, so I'll install that. And then you can get the Google Play APK or the vanilla. I'm just going to stick with the vanilla one because it works fine. Give that a moment. You'll get this other uninstall unknown apps. So any apps you install from, you'll get this just once, and then we're just going to give it the permissions it needs. Okay, and then we're going to install that. And then Cemu dual screen. So this is for our Wii U emulation. So I'm going to install this one. Do make sure that the app fully downloads and pops up the install, because I've had it before where I've tapped it and then I've gone off it and it hasn't quite completed and it's just not installed. Citra MNJ is another 3DS emulator. I won't be covering that one in this video, but I have covered it in my 3DS and DS emulation video. Citron is a emulator for a certain newer Nintendo console. Again, it's not my preferred one. I won't be covering it here. However, check those other videos. Dolphin is a very, very good Gamecube and Wii emulator. If you've ever done any emulation for Gamecube or Wii games, you'll probably come across Dolphin before. So we're definitely going to want that one. I'll install it. Duckstation is going to be our PS1 emulator. Make sure we get that. If some of these systems don't appeal to you, you don't have to download the emulators, and feel free to skip those chapters later on. Eden is going to be our preferred emulator for you know what. So we're going to install that. So there's tons of different versions of these. I just use the standard one. There's other different versions that have very slightly different things, but for me, the standard one works. So if it ain't broke, if it ain't very broke, it's maybe a little bit broke. Flycast is a Dreamcast emulator. Personally, I don't really play much on the Dreamcast, so it's not something I've properly covered. I just use the built-in Dreamcast emulator as part of Retroarch. MelonDS dual screen, so make sure you see the dual screen version. If you don't see the dual screen version, it means you've imported the wrong emulation pack. So this one will allow us to take full advantage of both screens. Otherwise, like for most versions of MelonDS, you'll have one screen on here and then one screen over here, and it's just not very good at all. So we'll get MelonDS. We'll just get the top one. The nightly one is more up to date, but it's also prone to more bugs, so we'll just stick with the secure one. Nether SX2, this is going to be our PS2 emulator. This is one we do want. I'm going to install that. Pico 8 it's kind of a fake console. It's not something that I've used, but if you're familiar with it, you can get it here. It's just a native one, you just log in. PPSSPP is a PSP emulator, so we do want that. And then Retroarch is going to be one of our main emulators, so we definitely want that one. RPCSX is a PS3 emulator. Again, not going to be covering that. ScumVM, if you're a fan of old school point-and-click adventure games, then you'll probably have come across ScumVM. It does work on Android, but it's not something... It works better on PC, personally, so again, I won't be covering that. And Vita 3K, I won't be covering that in this video either. I have covered it in a separate video, which goes into way more detail. But as the Vita's not the most popular console, I say that as someone who owned a Vita, I was like one of the 10 people that did, then do check out that video if you are interested. So for front ends, so this is going to be our... Basically, if you've used something like Netflix and you have this gorgeous library where it's got all the artworks, that is your front end. It's just a nicer way to view all your games and your media. The one I'll be covering in this video is IISU, which isn't available as part of this pack. However, just to give you a quick overview, Cocoon is a dual screen front end. It's great, I recommend it. I've covered all these in separate videos, with the exception of Pegasus, which I'll explain shortly. So do check out those videos. I've also done a full overview guide for these front ends, so it'll give you a quick look at kind of the layout of them. So if you see one of those that you think appeals to you, then by all means follow that one. But for the purposes of this guide, I'll be covering it through IISU. Digi Show is nice. It's a pretty simple one. Pegasus, I have tried and tried and tried to get Pegasus in a usable state. The setup is so manual and so complicated that I've got it to work, but it took so long. And by that point, I was that fed up. I thought, what's the point? I'm just going to stick to something that just works. So if you're a proper tinkerer and you can get Pegasus working, then fair play to you, because I got fed up. And Retroarch is a slightly newer one. I believe it's by a Ukrainian developer. It's fantastic. It's really good. I did a separate video on this as well. PC emulation. I won't be covering PC emulation in this video because there's a little bit more nuance to it. However, I have covered it in other videos. So you've got GameHub Lite, Game Native, and WinLater. I haven't covered WinLater because it's a little bit more complex than GameHub and Game Native. However, those two I have covered, so do check out those videos. And the same for streaming. So Moonlight isn't in active development anymore, I believe, so I've covered Artemis and Apollo, which is the PC side. Again, I've got tons of videos on my channel, so I'm aware I'm brushing over this, but you've waited long enough to get the Thor, so let's stop messing about and let's get on with some games. Track only. This just means that it will tell you when there's an update to either the emulation pack or the Turnip Drivers. Turnip Drivers are something we'll cover later. I do have a whole video. I'm really plugging my own channel here. I have a whole video detailing what Turnip Drivers are and why you need them. In a nutshell, they are graphics drivers that help emulators run better. Not every emulator, just certain ones. But so with this, it won't download them for you. It just tells you there's an update, you need to go download it. Utilities. So some of these just little tools. I'll quickly run through them. I'll download them and I'll cover them at the end as like a kind of little extra bonuses. So Bifrost is an LED controller. So if you look at your Thor, you'll notice the little LED lights. This gives you a little bit more power over the animation, a bit more control over colours and things like that. EmuReady Lite, if you're someone who uses the special Intendno system or the PC emulation, this is basically a website where people have submitted reports for the games they've managed to get running, their settings they used for those games, because for that type of emulation, it requires a lot more nuance. And there's so many settings, and some things work great for others, and they're not so well on other stuff. So EmuReady is a great resource to see basically what others have done to get games to work, or if they've failed, then games just do not work at all. ESD Android apps is redundant. ESD Companion is the companion app, funnily enough, to ESDE. ESDE is another front end, which is my personal favourite. It is technically paid, and when I say technically paid, I mean it's a one-time payment where you sign up to their Patreon and they add you to a mailing list where they'll send you the APK files. I've covered this in detail. The companion app is a secondary app that goes alongside it that takes advantage of the bottom screen, and it's great. So again, check out my channel, guys. RetroPup, welcome. Yarn Creeper is a app launcher, which basically has on your bottom screen, it's just a nicer looking app launcher. It's quite customizable. It's great. It works alongside Mjolnir, which is our next app. So Mjolnir is an app that basically allows you to have two separate front ends or two separate launchers on each individual screen. So if you want one particular launcher on top and a different one on bottom, Mjolnir will allow you to do that. Odin Tools is some extra tweaks. I've covered this in another video. Pixel Guide. Pixel Guide is a must-have. Pixel Guide allows you to, if you're someone who plays like big JRPGs or games where you might need a walkthrough, Pixel Guide allows you to add them to an app from GameFAQs or things like that. And it's great to have. And one of the best things about the Thor, in my opinion, is if I'm playing a Final Fantasy on the top screen, I've got the walkthrough on the bottom screen if I get stuck. So that is a great little tool by Rexmon. It's absolutely brilliant. SyncThing I have just covered recently in a video. This is for synchronizing data across devices. Again, not something I'll cover today because the setup was a bit of a pain. So that's it for the Obtainium side. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each of the emulators and we're going to set them up. And then once we've done all that, we'll get into the front end. See you shortly. Okay, so now we're ready to go and set up our emulators. So what I've done first is that Thor folder that we created at the start. I've plugged my USB in and I've copied that over to my root storage. I've also downloaded from Google Play, I've downloaded Solid Explorer. So this is just a file explorer for the device. It's optional, but I recommend it. It's completely free. There is a pro tier that's paid, but a lot of the features, they're not going to be very necessary. So we'll open up Solid Explorer. So all I've done is there's my ROMs folder and there is my BIOS folder. So I've just copied them over so we can access them. So now we're going to dive into Retroarch. So we're going to open it up. You're going to get this little pop-up about the permissions. You tend to get this on most apps, pretty much all the apps. So it's going to ask for permission. We're going to allow it. There we go. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change this, in my opinion, very ugly UI. So we're going to hit the settings cog on the right-hand side, and then we're going to scroll down until we find drivers. We're going to tap into drivers. We're going to tap into menu, and you can pick any of these that you want. I'm going to be using XMB. I think it's the most, as well as being the most visually appealing one, it's probably the easiest to follow. So the XMB driver will be very familiar to those who've used a PS3 or a PSP. So now we're going to go back to the little home icon. So for Retroarch, anytime we make any changes to the system, before we close the app, we need to make sure we save our configuration file. So I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to tap configuration file. I'm going to tap save current configuration, and then that will save any changes I've made into the default configuration. And then I'm going to swipe up and I'm going to fully close the app. You need to make sure it's fully closed, otherwise it won't load the new configuration. So now that's done, we're going to open up Retroarch, and this is Retroarch. So this is, like I said at the start, it's not an all-in-one, it's a most-in-one. So this will cover everything from the very classic era, your Ataris, your Magnavox Odysseys, your ColecoVision, like consoles way before my time, and I imagine way before. Some of these you probably never even heard of. All the way up to the latest one it does is PSP. We're not going to be using the PSP core for this. We have our own dedicated app, but we'll go through the cores shortly and you'll see the systems that it covers. So the first thing I'm going to do, just for a little bit of ease, is I'm going to go over to the input menu, and then I'm going to go to menu controls, and I'm just going to disable swap the OK and the cancel buttons, because as we're using the switch layout on the Thor, so we've got our A on our right, our B on our bottom, that's a check, Y on the left, and then X up top. It just makes it easier. So as soon as I enable that, when I press, oop, I didn't even enable it. There we go. As soon as I press B, it's going to go back. There we go. Takes a few moments to kind of get the psychology behind it. So yeah, there we go. So like I said, this is Retroarch. So what we're going to do first is we're going to make sure we've got everything up to date. So the way we do that is we're going to go down to our online updater, go into that, and we're going to go into our core downloader. So these are basically our emulators that live inside Retroarch. So there are tons of these. I'm just going to go through and pick the ones that I recommend. If you are already familiar with Retroarch and you have your favorites, pick those. For those complete newbies and beginners, just use these. So for our arcade, I use the Final Burn Neo core. Anything that I've selected will have this little hash key at the side, so you know which ones have. For the Atari, I tend to just use the Stellar core, and then the Atari 800 core. I don't tend to play a lot of Atari. So like you can see, there's all sorts in here. ColecoVision, Commodores, DOSBox. I won't be covering these, just the popular ones, otherwise we'd be here all day. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to Nintendo. So there are cores for the 3DS and the DS. I won't be using those because, like I said, we have our own external apps which allow us to have greater control over the emulators. The Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I like Gambate, I believe it's pronounced. There's essentially these all do the same thing, however some might be more compatible with certain games than others. However, I've never had any issues with Gambate. Game Boy Advance, I like MGBA. I believe VBA Next is quite a popular one as well. I've never used it personally, but you can't really go wrong with either. But I like MGBA. For the Gamecube, so there's a Dolphin core here, which we won't be using. We have our standalone Dolphin installation. For NES or Famicom, we're going to use Misen. N64, I like using the Nintendo 64 MuPen 64 Plus Next GLES3 core. There is a standalone N64 emulator. I believe it's paid. I haven't used it myself. I don't tend to play a lot of N64 games. It wasn't something I have a lot of nostalgia for. But for those of you more involved in that scene, then there is a paid N64 emulator. I do believe it's paid. But you can't go wrong with this emulator. For the SNES, I like the SNES 9X. Just the one without the year at the end of it, just the standard one. For what have we got next? I use the Dreamcast on AOMI. I use Flycast. There is a standalone Flycast app in Obtainium, but I don't tend to play a lot of Dreamcast games. So for me, when I checked out Shenmue and things like that, I just use the standard Flycast core. For the Master System, Game Gear, Mega Drive, and Sega CD, I use Genesis Plus GX Wide. For Saturn, I use the Beetle Saturn. And I'm not going to use any of the PlayStation ones because, like I said many times before, we've got our own apps for that. And I think that is all the ones I need. I believe I've got them all. So they're the ones I use. Obviously, if you need to add any additional ones, that's entirely up to you. So then once those are downloaded, make sure we've updated them. And then when I go down here, and we're going to update all of these. So our core info files, our assets, our controller profiles, our cheats, our databases, our overlays, and our GLSL shaders. So you'll see at the bottom, there's the little progress bar that will flip across. So whilst that's doing, we're going to go over to settings, and we're just going to configure mainly our controller. So we're going to go back to input. So for RetroPad binds and our port 1 controls, so analog to digital, I like to enable this on the left analog stick. What this basically means is if you are playing a game that uses the D-pad, or you want to use the analog stick, it will translate the analog stick movements into the D-pad. And then in here, so we're just gonna So most of these are mapped already, but we're just going to go through and do them ourselves. So we're going to click into one of them and then press the relevant button. So I'm going to press A on D-pad up, and I'm going to hold R up key. Okay, future Alex here. So halfway through recording this setup, my capture software froze. So what I'm going to do is, I didn't realise until after I'd finished setting up Retroarch, so I'm just going to cover what I've already set up, so we'll see how far we get on. So for our inputs, so I'm going to go back to our binds, and all I did was I went through each individual input, and then I held, you press A, and then you hold the relevant key. So up, down, work your way through, get those all set up nicely, and the same for the analog sticks. Once we've done that, we're going to want to go back out into our hotkeys. So I've already set these up. Like I said, I didn't realise it had crashed until after the fact. For those of you who aren't aware what a hotkey is, you imagine you're using a keyboard. In order to copy and paste something, you hold Control, you press C, then you hold Control and press V. That's your copy and paste. Control, in this case, is your hotkey. So it's a key that enables those shortcuts. So in this case, I'm using button 109 on the Thor, which is the little select button, which is just above the, where's the camera gone? There we go, just above the left analog stick there. That's what I use as my hotkey. So then what I've done is the hotkeys I've set up are my menu toggle. So this will allow you to get into the Retroarch menu from within a game rather than having to close the game and come back out. So I have this as my X button. So I hold select to press X, and then that will bring up the menu. For my quit button, I use start. So if I want to completely quit out of a game, I hold select and press start. And then for my fast forward toggle, so if you play, for example, Pokemon or an RPG, and there's so much yammering, and Professor Oak's been going on about how to play Pokemon games for 35 years, and you know all this, you can just hold the select button, and I use the right trigger just to enable and then disable the toggle. I don't set things like slow motion or rewind because I use retro achievements and I use the hardcore mode. Cheats, rewinds, and save and load states are disabled. However, if you are someone that uses save and load states, you can do the exact same thing down here. I know some people use, I think, their hotkey and L1 to load, R1 to save, or vice versa. That is entirely up to you. But whatever you do, make sure once you've done, you go back to your configuration file and you hit that save button. Get in the habit of doing that anytime you're within Retroarch. Trust me, it will save you bacon. And then all we're going to do is we're going to go to our achievement settings. So I've already done all this. So I've enabled the achievements, I've inputted my username and password, and then appearance is just where the notifications show on the screen when you unlock an achievement. Visibility, there's some, if you want to see, you don't want to see any of the pop-ups, but you still want to unlock them, you can enable and disable these as you see fit. This is entirely up to you. Hardcore mode, like I was saying, this is what I use in Retro Achievements. So basically, this gives you it allows you to unlock what's called masteries. So in Retro Achievements, if you get the achievements, there's two modes. There's hardcore mode and softcore mode. Hardcore mode is, yep, you've got the achievement, you've achieved it. Softcore mode is, you earned the achievement, but you didn't earn the achievement. You used cheats, you rewound, you did save states, load states. It's not a real achievement. And I'm a man of pride, so I make sure I have hardcore mode enabled. And then I like having an unlock sound as well. You can have an automatic screenshot. However, I found from my many years of achievement hunting and trophy hunting, the screenshots are usually just a bit rubbish. So now that's set up, the last thing I did is in my directory, we have our BIOS files. So like I said, I downloaded a Retroarch pack. This isn't necessary as most of the cores run perfectly fine without a BIOS in Retroarch. However, all I did was I pressed A on this and it allows you to set your directory. So you can navigate through your parent directory. So there's my SD card. There's my internal storage, the emulated storage. I'm going to go into that. And then, oops, sorry, no, I'm going to self, not emulated. Okay, it doesn't seem to be working now. So I'm just going to go back to how it was. And then I'm going to go into my BIOS folder, into Retroarch, and I'm just going to click use this directory, and that will scan, and then any relevant files it needs, it'll just use. And you can remap any of the folders as you see fit. So for example, if you want your save files or save states to be located on your SD card, this is where you'd edit those folders. So for example, I could press save files, go up the parent directory, go to this. So in my case, it's this 3338-6664 folder. This is my SD card. And then you can make a folder in there and do it that way. But I'm just going to leave it as is. So that's it for RetroArch, or is it? No, we need to hit that config file and we need to save that current configuration. Get in the habit of doing that. So this is it for the RetroArch setup. Because we're not using RetroArch as our front end, we're going to load games from it later on using our front end, which is in this case IISU. So that is RetroArch. Let's move on. Okay, next up we have Duckstation. This is going to be our PS1 emulator, and probably one of the ones I use the most. So we're just going to load it up, and then you're going to get this lovely little setup wizard, which a lot of these emulators do have, and it is very, very handy. So most of these, you just follow the instructions, and it does most of the work for you. So we're just going to hit next. So for our GPU renderer, we're going to want to use Vulkan. So basically what this is the kind of language that it will use to render the graphics. Vulkan, I find to be the better one. However, if you find that your games kind of had like if your games have extra graphical glitches, then you can try OpenGL as well. We don't want to use software, although software is technically the most accurate. With software, we lose the ability to upscale the resolution. So your games will be rendered at the native resolution that they were all those years ago in the 90s. So for internal resolution, you're going to want to bump it up to, I bump it up to 5 times 1080p. The screen on the Thor is a 1080p screen. We might as well utilize it. For aspect ratio, you can leave this at 4:3. Some people prefer that. I prefer 16:9, although this can make things look a little bit stretched. This is entirely a personal preference, but for this example, I'm just going to set it to 16:9, so it takes up the full screen. Screen orientation, obviously we'll want to leave this in landscape. Don't need to expand to cutout area because this doesn't have a notch. Widescreen rendering, so some of these have patches that are built into the emulator itself, so it will apply that patch. So rather than it stretch the image to 16:9 and make all the characters look dead chubby, it's a bit more advanced, so it scales properly and it looks better. So I'm going to enable that. So I'm also going to enable this PGXP geometry correction. So if you ever played on a PS1, you'll have seen this. This is basically, I think if you play a game like Tomb Raider and you rotate the camera, you'll see the polygons kind of jerk a little bit. It's wobbly textures. This reduces it. It doesn't remove it. It does make it noticeably better though. So I always enable that. So here we need our BIOS. Without our BIOS, our games will not boot. So we're going to import BIOS. It's going to load up our dialog. So I'm going to go to my AYN Thor. Obviously, if you have these saved in your SD card, go to the SD card. I'm going to go to our BIOS folder. I'm going to go to the PSX. So the version I'm using, like I mentioned at the start, is our PSX on PSP 660. So this is technically the PSP version of the PS1 software, but it works brilliantly. So I'm just going to import that. You get this little pop-up saying, yep, it's been imported. And if you scroll down, you'll see that it's detected all the regions. So if you've got games from Japan or the USA or Europe or Australia, then they'll all be there. Game directories. So this is going to be our ROMs folder. So again, if you've got these saved on your SD card, then just point it to your SD card. Mine are internal, so I'm going to add a folder. I'm going to go to my root storage. I'm going to go to my ROMs folder. I'm going to look for my PSX folder, which is there. And then I'm going to use this folder. There we go. Retro Achievements. So this, we're going to log in to Retro Achievements directly in the emulator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in and I'll be back momentarily. So there we go. When we log in, you'll get this confirmation that it's logged in. So that's logged in as me. Then we'll go next, and that's the setup complete. So I've added a game directory, but I forgot to move my games into the PSX folder. So make sure you've actually got some games. So again, I'll be back shortly. Okay, there we are. So I've moved my games to the correct folder, and then I'm just gonna close the app and then reopen it, and it should there we go, it's scanned my games. So you can boot your games straight from here, and you can also, if you tap at the top right, you can change the cover art, but we don't have the cover art. So how do we get the cover arts? So if we tap this hamburger menu at the top, you will see a download covers, and we're going to need to give it a URL. So the URL we need is in here. I did try and paste this in the description and it just did not like it. So I'll copy the link to the GitHub in the description, and then if you follow the instructions, it tells you where to get it. So there's 2D covers and there's 3D covers. I just like the 2D ones personally. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in there. So I did that straight from my computer. You can just do it from the browser on the Thor. So there we are. So I've got my games. I can view them as a list. And you can see on the right-hand side, it's got my retro achievements. And then if I tap, we've got this nice cover view. So now we need to set up some of the app settings. So our interface, most of this was covered by the setup wizard. However, there's a few things we still need to cover. So if you're someone who wants to show your frame rate or CPU, GPU usage, you can enable all those. Personally, I forget about most of that and I go off how a game plays. Console region you want to leave to auto protect. Fast forward boot I like to enable just because it can speed up that time, and fast forward memory card access. So I found that in certain games, when it loads the save dialog, it can take a moment. This speeds that up. So this is one I always have enabled. Most of these I tend to leave as is. Don't really need to overclock. And then I don't enable rewind. If you want to enable rewind, you absolutely can. Graphics we've covered. So we're not using software rendering. So you can stretch to fill if you like. I like to enable Force 4:3 for FMVs. So when it has those old blocky cutscenes, it forces them into a 4:3 aspect ratio. It doesn't try to stretch them. Otherwise, they can look a little bit rubbish. So texture replacements. So what these are is you can get texture replacements. People do up-res texture packs online or AI up-res texture packs. I don't tend to use them for PS1 games. I think the built-in upscaling does the job just fine. However, for PS2 games, I do use some of them, so I'll cover that for the PS2 tutorial. For most of this, I just leave as the default because I think that, like I said, the upscaling does the job. Audio, don't really need to change anything here unless you want to play the games muted by default. Just turn the volume down. Post-processing, so if you're someone who uses shaders, I'm not personally, you can enable post-processing and then add a shader. And for example, if you want a CRT style, so if you want the kind of old monitors with the slightly kind of bowed sides, you can do. There's all sorts in here. There's film grain, there's LUT, which is allows you to control the colour. There's all sorts in there. I'm not going to cover any of these. Have a play around, see what works for you. Achievements we're already signed into, but you can enable and disable things like hardcore mode from this menu. Game list. Now, for Duckstation, this isn't something that applies to all emulators. You can have more than one directory. So if you have some games on your internal storage or some games on an SD card, all you need to do is add that additional folder. And then when you open the app and it scans, it'll grab both. Memory cards. So you want to create a memory card. So I'm going to create a new memory card. I'm just going to call this Alex. I'm Alex. It makes sense. And then memory card type, you can use a separate card per game or a shared card between all games. I like using a shared card between all games so that when I get to the Psycho Mantis boss battle in Metal Gear Solid 1, he can read all the save games I have and make references to things like Castlevania or whichever other ones he says. So we have this shared card. So you can tap that and change it to the Alex one that I've just created. You can have a second memory card if you like. Personally, I don't really think there's a need, but your mileage may vary. BIOS, obviously, we've already imported that. And then for advanced, most of these aren't really applicable. Again, some of these settings are for people who really delve into the depths of tweaking. So outside of the ones we've already enabled, I haven't really found much use for these yet. My knowledge is quite basic for a lot of the really high-end emulation stuff, but just to get it in a position where it's playable, this is all you need. So now, let's boot up. Let's go for Jackie Chan Stuntmaster. Aha! I've forgotten something. So by default, we'll exit out. So to exit, if you just press the little back arrow on the bottom right of the Thor, or you can swipe it from the left. By default, the controller is usually automatically mapped for these emulators. However, it maps it based off an Xbox layout, not a Switch one. So you might find it feels like the buttons have been swapped. So we're going to go into controller settings and then touchscreen. So for our touchscreen controller view, we're going to tap into that and click none. We don't need to see the touchscreen at all because we've got a controller. The port 1. Controller type, we're going to make sure it's dual shock because that's essentially what we've got. You can perform an automatic mapping, but like I said, if I do an automatic mapping, you'll see that the X and circle buttons are swapped, as are the square and triangle buttons. So it's much easier just to do your own mapping. So same as we did for Retroarch is we're going to tap into each one and then press the relevant button. So up, right, down, left, triangle, circle, X, square, select, start. I don't use anything for the analog toggle. I don't think I ever used the analog toggle on the original controller. L1, R1, L2, R2, L3, R3, and then the left stick, left, right, down, up. Again, do be careful when you do the analog sticks, just in case you knock it the wrong way by accident and it maps it to the wrong axis. It's just going to cause you a little bit of a headache. And the same for the right stick, left, right, down, and up. Don't need to switch the large motors or the macros, and there we are. So for hotkeys, again, you can use toggle. So for this one, so like with Retroarch, you set a hotkey enabler, which in that case was select. For Duckstation, and I believe some of the other emulators, you create bindings. So combinations of buttons that you hold. So for fast forward toggle, I'm just going to hold select and then press the right trigger. And as you'll see, it's accounted for both of those buttons there. So that is pretty much it. So now I'm going to go, wait, whoa. Just make sure I've covered everything. Yep. Let's give Jackie Chan another try. So I'm going to do just a clean boot. So you can see there that the retro achievements pop-up showed. So I've got 47 achievements. So I still need to finish this one properly, but I'm busy making great tutorials. Subscribe to RetroPup, please. It helps me out. So we'll just load up and get into the game, and you can see how it runs. So if you don't have the BIOS, you might find that you get an error, or the game won't load at all, or it just it loads the initial bit and then crashes. So do make sure you have those BIOS files, otherwise you won't get very far. I do wish you could kind of skip a lot of this preamble. So you'll see that if I hold, so you can see already that it looks a lot smoother and better than it did on the original PS1. If I hold select and press the right trigger, you'll see it goes super duper fast motion, which I wouldn't advise playing a game like this. But yeah, you can see it runs well, the controls are mapped correctly, so that's PS1. So let's move on to PS2. Okay, so let's look at PS2. So for PS2, we're going to use Nether SX2 Classic. So we're going to open it up. This one will come with a setup wizard. I believe it's pretty much identical to the Duckstation one, but we'll go through it anyway. So we're going to hit next. There's some FAQs here. Just be wary as well. These are free apps. There have been reports of people kind of selling them as though they're paid apps, so do be careful. If you see someone selling any of these emulators, you're being ripped off. So please just follow the guides that I've set up. Make sure you only get them from reputable sources. There is a disclaimer here that does cover that. So for settings, I just leave it on optimal or safe defaults. That's never really given me any issue. Import our BIOS. So like we did for Duckstation, we're going to go to our BIOS folder, go to PS2, and then I'm using the SCPH-70012 bin. I'll open that up. This is a US-based BIOS. If you find that your games don't work, if you're playing Japanese ones, for example, or European ones, and this doesn't work, then other BIOS are available. You just need to hunt them down. Game directories, exact same as we did before. And again, you can have multiple directories, but I just tend to stick to the one. There we go, PS2. I'm going to allow that. I made sure the games are in the right folder this time. And then we're going to finish. So there we are. So same principle as with the PS1 covers. If you want covers, you can tap the hamburger menu on the top left. You'll notice that it's pretty much identical UI-wise to Duckstation. I don't know if they're developed by the same people, actually. I probably should have researched that. So we're going to hit download covers. So for this one, there will be covers already as part of the URL. So all you need to do is just delete the relevant one. So I quite like the 2D covers. So all I'm going to do is tap into it, and then I'm just going to delete that top line. Here we go, and then download, and it should. There we go. All my covers already. So there we are. Nice and easy. So we're going to delve into our app settings. So you can enable patch codes. So these are cheats and things like that. I don't tend to use them, as I covered before. However, if you are someone that uses patch codes, you can enable that and then load cheat files in if that's something that you're into. Safe data on shutdown can be quite helpful if you need to quickly exit a game. I don't really use it. That's entirely up to you. A lot of these aren't necessary. Like I said in the Duckstation one, if you want to have those extra analytics for your frame rate or your GPU usage, you can enable them as you see fit. Same for system. I don't use the fast disk access for Nether SX2. Forgot what I was then. As it's not recommended by the developers, and it can lead to instability and crashes and things like that. So I just leave that as is. GPU renderer, I'm going to change this over to Vulkan. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if you have any issues with Vulkan, try it on OpenGL, see how you get on. You just don't really want to use software. For our upscaler, we're going to set this to 2.5. So you'll see there, 1080p, full HD. If you find that some games are running a bit slow, you can just knock it down so it doesn't upscale as much. However, this AYN Thor is a little beast, so you can really push it. A lot of these I tend to leave on the defaults, things like mip mapping and trilinear filtering. Again, a lot of these are way above my knowledge base. It's all to do with how it renders graphics. Most of them is down to personal preference. Personally, for the type of games I play and the way I play games, it works perfectly fine, so I wouldn't worry. Aspect ratio, I'm going to switch to widescreen. FMV aspect ratio, I'm just going to leave it as off and it'll use the normal one. So I'm going to enable widescreen patches and no interlacing patches. So some of the widescreen patches are built into the emulator directly. If it has a compatible one, it will automatically apply it if that's enabled. There are widescreen cheats, I believe, as well. However, if you're using retro achievements, they'll knock you over to that softcore mode. And for no interlacing, interlacing was the way games used to display before progressive. So if you had like it was like a 480i telly, you imagine that everything was kind of lines, and you'd see kind of, it looked like thousands of little lines. No, this kind of fixes that so that the images look smoother. Don't think there's anything else. Again, there's post-processing here if you want someone who likes a TV shader, for example, with some scan lines. I'm not into that kind of thing. Bear in mind that any shaders you do apply can have a performance hit. However, like I said, this thing's a little beast, so it's probably not going to be noticeable. If you're someone who uses texture packs, then what you can do is you can load the texture replacements and then make sure asynchronous texture replacement is enabled as well, because this will basically do a lot of the loading before the textures are required. Once I've set up NetherSX2, I'll show you where to put those textures. Audio, I believe we can just leave as is. Memory cards. So for memory cards, kind of similar to what we did for Duckstation, I'm going to create a new one. However, for this, I'm going to use folder. So rather than store it as a memory card file, having a folder means that each game has its own folder within that main folder. It's just a much easier way to manage saves. So again, I'm just going to call this Alex with 1x. Create that. And then I'm going to make sure in memory card slot 1, the card's enabled. And I tap into that and select the folder. And I'm going to disable memory card 2 because I don't really need it. The game list, obviously I've already added my folder. Again, if you have multiple folders or split across devices, you can add that here as well. BIOS, if you need to add an additional BIOS, you can do that here. Achievements, so I'm going to enable that, enable hardcore mode, and then I'm going to quickly log into my account. And then as I'm connected to my PC, I can just copy and paste my password in there. And you can't see it. There we go. So it's logged me in. It's generated the token. So I know that I'm definitely there. Advanced, again, this is top level stuff. So if this is something that means anything to you, Godspeed, go have a play around. However, for me, nothing's really required me to delve deep into these graphical settings. So now the app settings are done, we're going to do the input setting, control settings, they're called in this. So there we are. So one thing to notice as well is you can enable a per game configuration once you've opened a game. So if you have specific inputs you'd prefer on certain games, you can do it that way. Personally, for PlayStation, I don't really think that's applicable. Not to me anyway. It might be to you. That is your choice. For touchscreen, again, touchscreen controller view, we're going to turn that off. We don't need the touchscreen. We've got a built-in controller in our device. Controller port 1. So again, we could do the automatic mapping, but I'll show you what happens if we do automatic mapping. We'll tap automatic mapping, we'll select loading controller. It will do most of it. So for example, if I do that, and then you'll see I'm pressing up and down and it's not changing. However, when I get to these face buttons, our triangle, circle, X and square, so our X button, it says is button 96. However, if I tap it and then press the B button, which would be the X button on a PlayStation controller, you'll see change to 97 because they're backwards. So you can just remap the face buttons. So we'll do triangle, circle, X and square, and you'll see that those ones changed. The others, in my experience, have all been fine. So that is probably the easiest way to do it, is do the automatic and then just tweak the face buttons. Don't need control port 2, don't need USB port 1, unless you wanted to add a Rock Band drum kit, which, I mean, I love this little device, but I can't imagine running a Rock Band drum kit off it. And then for hotkeys, same as I covered before. So the other one I really use is fast forward, just to speed up some of the boringness. So I'm going to hold my select and press R2. Again, if you want to save to, if you want to load or save states, that's entirely up to you. You can set those hotkeys here. And unlike Retroarch, you don't set a standard hotkey enable, you just do some controller binding, so a multiple of buttons that you hold to enable those hotkeys. So now that's done, I will boot into a game quickly. We'll do Airblade, I think loads quite quickly. So you'll see there it popped up with the widescreen patch was active. It found a compatible widescreen patch, so for this the characters won't look stretched. However, if it can't find one, you might notice the characters look a little bit in need of Ozempic. So I'm just going to load up a game quickly. One thing you can do as well, it's a little bit of a cheat. So you'll get this. So the first time you create a memory card, it might say, oh, the memory card's on format, you want to format the memory card. Yes, you do that once, and then it should create the files in a way where future games should be fine. So if I just do a score attack, well, a little cheat you can do is if I enable fast forward, things usually load a little bit quicker. Doesn't always work, but it can do. So as you can see, we've got the widescreen patch, we've got the upscaling, so this looks almost like a HD remaster. So yeah, that is the same with NetherSX2. So before we finish for PS2, I'm just going to show you, if you have texture packs that you've acquired online, I know there's some great communities out there, I think GBA Temp, they list a lot of their texture packs. What you need to do is in your File Explorer, in my case Solid Explorer, you need to go to your internal memory and then your Android folder. We need to go into data, we need to go into the app itself. So in this case, it's xyz.ethersx2.android. And we're going to go into files, and then you see there's this textures folder. So you need to paste your files in that folder. There will be an ID for that game. It's usually like SLUS dash and then a number, or SLES. That has to be in that folder, and then it will automatically, when you load the game, it'll be able to load those textures in. So yeah, that's it for PS2 emulation. Let's look at PSP. Okay, let's get into setting up PPSSPP for our PSP emulation. That's a lot of P's and a lot of S's and a lot of more P's. So open it up. So this one does have a setup wizard, however, it's not the same as the Duckstation and NetherSX2 one. So this one first is going to ask us where to keep PSP data. So some emulators will ask for a specific folder where they store the necessary app data. So we'll just choose to create one. I just create one in my root storage. I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it PPSSPP and then use that folder. You might also see this for certain front ends. I know ESDE, Cocoon, there's probably others as well. They will ask, where do we put our data? So you just create a new folder, whether that's on your SD card or in your internal storage, that's entirely up to you. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is go into our settings, and then the back end, by default, it's set to Vulkan. You can leave it at that. Or, like I said on the previous setups, if you find there's some graphical glitches, switch to OpenGL, see how you get on. It might just be a game issue. For rendering resolution, we're going to go for 4 times for the 1080p. Again, if you notice slow down, maybe drop it down, see how you get on. And then most of these we can just leave as the default because it runs them pretty well. Controls, we just need to set our control mapping. So again, this will do or it will automatically map the controls, or what it thinks are the controls, with the issue being these face buttons. So you can see there, circle, it says it's the B button. I'm looking at the B button, and that's where X should be. So I'm just going to quickly tap into that and then map the keys. So you can see there, as I'm changing them, it's changing them on the screen. The others are absolutely fine. And it's even done the fast forward for me as well. So that's it for controls. Then I'm going to back out of that. Audio, we don't need to touch. Obviously, make sure your sound's enabled. Networking, I haven't looked too much into this, but you can play online games. I will probably end up doing a full setup video for online play for a lot of these emulators. However, it's not something I have a great deal of experience in, so I won't be covering it today. Tools. So our good buddy retro achievements. You want to make sure those are enabled. So we're going to tap that. It's going to ask for the username and password. So I'm just going to I'm just going to pop in my usual credentials. Okay, so there we go. So I've got my credentials. I'm logging in. And there we are. So I can customize them. So this seems to be the only emulator I've found where you can customize the achievement unlock sound. So the default is, which is okay. But I know that you can import things like the proper trophy sound or whatever you might want. I don't mind the main one, it's fine. Developer tools, you can allow save states and hardcode modes, which is very handy to have. And then I'm just going to leave those unchecked. Pardon me. So we have our memory stick folder there, which is set to that PSP folder that we'd set up at the start for the setup wizard. You can adjust the size. Going to bump it up to 32. You don't really need to bump it up that much, but it depends on how many PSP games you play. And then again, a lot of this stuff I just leave on the default. You can have it emulate the PSP 1000 models if you want. However, I believe this can affect compatibility with games, so I'm just going to leave it on the 2000, 3000. And as a Brit, I like changing the date format to the Queens or the Kings, whichever one you prefer. So there we go. So now, where are our games? So if we press this browse folder, and then I'm going to find my ROMs folder, and go to PSP. I'm going to use that folder and allow it. It should automatically just pull my games in. And then if I add any more games, I can just hit refresh. So let's open up Daxter. So Daxter doesn't have retro achievements. So not every game has retro achievements, or it might be I've not got the correct ROM file. So you might have a European version when only the USA one has retro achievements. But you can see here that I've made a new save, so you don't need to set up the memory card as you did with the others because it's already created. So yeah, there's Daxter, and it really runs fine. I don't really play much of Daxter, but maybe want to add to the list. So that is PSP. So we've covered our PS1, PS2, PSP, and our really retro systems. So now we're going to look onto the ones that I'm sure a lot of you, if you've not already skipped to the relevant chapter, then thank you. But we're going to cover those Nintendo systems. See you shortly. Okay, so next we're going to look at MelonDS for the DS emulation. So just to note, this will only emulate the DS. It won't emulate the 3DS. That's what Azahar's for, which we'll be covering shortly. So we're going to open up MelonDS. So do bear in mind, this is a specific version of MelonDS, which enables us to utilize both screens. So what I'm going to do is, this one doesn't come with a setup wizard, unfortunately. First, I'm going to set my ROM directory, which is in my ROMs folder under NDS. There we go. It's populated my games already, nice and simple. So what we need to do is go into settings, and we can just work our way through them, and then see there's nothing we need to change in here. Save files, you can dictate where you want to save these, wherever you like. I just leave them next to the ROM file in this instance. System. So you can adjust the internal settings if you want to change your name. However, I believe this is more for some of the NetPlay features that, like I mentioned previously, I've not had a chance to properly look into. So for now, I'm just going to leave them as the defaults. For video renderer, we want to change to the OpenGL renderer. So I don't believe Vulkan's available on this fork. However, with the OpenGL renderer, it allows us to upscale the image so it looks better on the Thor screen. So I do 5 times native. I think that's probably the closest to 1080p. You can add filters if you like. These are shaders, so some of them add things like an LCD screen, so you get the nice kind of DS looking screen. There's HQ4X shaders, which I believe help increase the image clarity. Again, they can all have a performance hit that varies. For me, I just leave them off because I think it looks fine. Dual screen presets. So what you need to do is, as we're using the dual screen fork, we need to do, I think it's the second one, internal top, external bottom. So what this will do is have the top screen display on the top screen display on the top and the bottom screen display on the bottom, or you can flip it if you choose to. Oh, I didn't mean to tap off that. I'll keep the DS aspect ratio and then I'll hit OK. I don't want to see the FPS counter. A lot of these video hacks I haven't used. So yeah, we'll just leave them as is. Audio is fine. Input. So key mapping. So we'll do our usual key mapping. So for these, when you add a key, it tends to add them on top of what's already set. So what I tend to do is just remove everything that's there, and then we'll start again. So we'll do A, B, X, Y, left, right, up, down, L, and R. And then start and select. So toggle lid, I don't tend to set. Pause. This is the system level pause, so it freezes the game, which I don't tend to use. Fast forward toggle, I just use as R2. Don't need to set a hotkey for that because obviously the DS didn't have L2 and R2 buttons. And toggle the microphone as L2. And you can swap screens. So I have this as L3. So for any reason you want to quickly flip the screens around, then you can do so. And you can also set your quick save and quick loads as you see fit. And yeah, that's it for... So you can also enable custom layouts, which we don't need to do because we're using the specific fork of MelonDS. So retro achievements. So again, gotta log in to good old retro achievements. If you don't do this, you're missing out. There we are. I'm going to make sure hardcore mode's enabled, because I'm a real elite gamer. Or so I like to think. There we go. So if we boot up Pokemon Heart Gold, you'll see that automatically it's taken advantage of both screens. If we were using the normal version of MelonDS, which is more for single screen devices, we'd have to manually declare a layout. So you might have seen where some of them have kind of the top screen's over here, the bottom screen's over here. It's a little bit messy. We've got a dual screen device. We're going to take full advantage of that dual screen. So we also have these little shortcut keys up here, which can be deleted, but if you want to quickly fast forward the game or close the lid, which just blanks things out, and then you can enable the microphone if you want to. So yeah, that's MelonDS, quite simple. So now we're going to move on to 3DS. Okay, next up, we're going to look at Azahar, which is our 3DS emulator. So there are two 3DS emulators available from Obtainium. There is Azahar, or there is Citra MMJ. Setup is pretty much the same for both of them. However, I only really use Azahar, and I prefer it. I did cover Citra MMJ in my full 3DS setup guide, which is also available on my channel. However, for this setup, I'll be focusing primarily on Azahar. So let's boot it up. So this one comes with a lovely setup wizard, which we like. So when I get started, we're going to quickly click through, enable these permissions, notifications, microphone, while using the app camera. I mean, we'll allow it, but good luck finding one on the AYN Thor. So data folders. So for our user folder, this will be where Azahar as an app stores its own data. So like I mentioned in the PPSSPP video, I'm going to add a new folder, and this one I'm just going to call Azahar. So this keeps all of Azahar's data in a nice folder. So if you ever need to restart your device, or you want to move to an SD card, or copy those settings over to another device, it's all nicely contained. So I'm going to OK that. So applications, this is just our ROMs. I don't really know why it calls them applications. So I'm going to find my ROMs folder. And if you used the ESDE template that was provided by RUSS from Retro Gamecore, then the 3DS is under N3DS, which I don't know why. I don't know why it's not just 3DS, but there you are. So if you're looking for it, it's N3DS. You use this folder. I'm going to allow it. And there we go. So there we go. It's found my games. I've only got a couple. So we're going to go through and we're going to do some basic settings. So I advise having limit speed enabled. What this does is certain games the way they were built was basically run, because obviously they were set to the internal clock speed of the 3DS. If you have this unticked, this will run as fast as it can. So good luck. You can customize the limit speed percent if you want to limit the speed, but give it a little bit of wiggle room. There's also the turbo speed limit, which if you use the turbo hotkey, that's a secondary limit. So if you saw my Duckstation chapter when I made Jackie Chan move faster than he normally does, which is possible, even though he has the fastest hands in the East, this is, yes, you can go faster, but you can only go this much faster. So in this case, it's double speed, 200%. There we go. System. So I always leave new 3DS mode enabled. I believe this is applicable. If you have games that are only available on the new 3DS, then this enables that. I don't think I have any games that are only new 3DS, so that's we will see. You can customize your internal name and your country, things like that. I just leave all this on default. I think for things like the birth dates, there's some games that celebrate your birthday, but it doesn't need to know my birthday. And camera, we don't need gamepad, so we're going to set this up. So this doesn't come pre-configured like MelonDS did, so I'm just going to flip through and set the buttons as we've done time and time again. So for home button, I don't set one for home button because this is for accessing the home of the 3DS, which, because we're going through Azahar, we don't really need it. Circle pad. So this one you do on an axis. So it'll tell you to press up on the joystick, and then it'll detect the opposite axis as well. And then press right on the joystick for the horizontal axis. And then the same for the C stick. So for the D-pad, so some controllers, it can't detect the axis, so it does it for the D-pad. On the Thor, you don't need to set this. I found it causes issues. Oop, cancel that. We only need to set the D-pad button side, so I'm just going to do up, down, left, and right. And then for our triggers, we've got our L, our R, our ZL, and our ZR. And then for our hotkeys, kind of like we did with MelonDS, you can set these if you like. I don't tend to. Although you might want to set the turbo speed one, so I tend to set that as a right click. And there we go. Graphics. So the graphics API, I'm going to use Vulkan. Again, I know I've said it many times. Try Vulkan. If that gives you issues, try OpenGL or OpenGL ES in this case. It's still OpenGL, it's just a different version. So what I also do is I enable asynchronous shader compilation on this. So what this does is when it's loading in the graphics files, rather than do one after the other, it does them asynchronously, which means more than one at a time. It can cause some minor glitches, but it does also reduce stutter. So this isn't essential, but again, give it a try. If you don't like how it works, turn it off. Internal resolution, again, we're going to upscale to 4 times native, so as close to 1080p as we can get. And then I'm not going to set a filter, but you can if you want to. And then there are custom textures. I don't have any for 3DS, but you can. It says here, textures are loaded from load textures title ID. So that is in our, I'll just show you, in our Azahar folder that was created on our internal storage. In here, I believe it's in. It might only create it once you actually load them. But that's where it will look, essentially. And then texture sampling I leave as the game controlled. And then for layout, this is where, so unlike MelonDS, this one is just a standard version of Azahar, so we need to tell it which screens to use. So for our portrait screen layout, we're going to have original, and then for our secondary screen layout, we're going to have the bottom screen. And this should, when we load it up, render it on the correct screens. If you don't do that, I believe the default layout is it crushes them into the top screen. there we go. I think that's anything in debug. I don't think we need to touch anything in debug, because again, this is those high level settings that are way above my base. So one thing we also need that can help is a GPU driver. So you might have heard the term Turnip Drivers. I did a video covering what Turnip Drivers are, why we use them. For the 3DS, I found that I haven't really needed to use them. But what you can do is you can download Turnip Drivers. I'll have a link in the description. I'll cover it more in depth in my Eden video, but you can install them to this as well. So when we get to the other Nintendo consoles setup video, I'll go more in depth about Turnip Drivers. But just as an FYI. You can also customize the look of the app, but as we're going to be using this through a front end, don't really need to. So yeah, let's try and boot up. Let's give it some Snake Eater 3D. Okay, so I realised I actually made a mistake with regards to the screen layout. So what we're going to do is nip back into these settings and then go to layout, and then we want to set our landscape screen layout not to original or large screen. You want single screen, and then your portrait screen layout will be original. So if we go back and we load up Metal Gear Solid, we should see Big Boss running on the bottom screen, and then the top screen we should get the Konami logo. Yep, there it is. So we've got both our screens there running really well. And that's Azahar for 3DS. So next we will look at our Dolphin, which is our GameCube and our Wii emulator. So see you shortly. Okay, so flipping back to just our top screen for now, we're going to look at Dolphin, which is for both GameCube and the Wii. So we're going to load it up. We're not going to enable the usage report. So as you can see at the top, we've got GameCube and Wii. So we'll start with GameCube first. So I'm going to add our games. So I'm going to point this at our GameCube folder. GC if you're using the Retro Game Core pack. Use that folder. There we go, it's loaded those in already. And then for Wii, I'm going to do the exact same thing. However, I'm going to point it at the Wii folder. I've only got the Super Mario Galaxies in there. So first up, let's go to GameCube. So we're going to hit Settings, then Config. So for General, I like to enable change discs automatically. If you have multi-disc games, for example, I know the Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes, and there is some others for GameCube that I've forgotten. But this basically, when it gets to the relevant point in the game, if you're using a multi-disc game file, which I won't cover today because the setup was a nightmare. However, I do have a video on this about making that setup as painless as possible. So do check that out if you are someone who plays multi-disc games. But basically this toggle, it will automatically switch the disc for you whenever it needs to, rather than you having to manually load up the menu, change the disc, and it's not a big ask, but you're a busy man or lady. So for interface, don't think there's nothing there. Audio is fine. Paths, you don't need to touch these. GameCube, there we go. So this is going to be our main GameCube settings. So for our slot A device, I leave this on GCI folder. This is similar to the folder setup for Nether SX2. So all the save data will be in a folder rather than on a emulated memory card. And then the same for Wii. So Wii has a few more options. So obviously you want to enable widescreen, PAL 60. So if you're someone who is in the PAL region like myself, a lot of the games rendered natively at 50 Hz. So they felt a little bit slower than the US counterparts. This will force any game that has the option to enable 60 Hz into 60 Hz. Although I do recommend if you get the US copy of the ROMs, it's just the same. Enable the screensaver if you want. SD card setting. So this is for the emulated SD card that's on the Wii itself. So if you've ever soft modded a Wii, you'll be familiar with that SD card slot. And then a lot of this, I don't use a sensor bar with this. I believe the Dolphin bar works. I've not tried it. I can't imagine using motion controls with a device like this. And also you can emulate devices, for example, the Skylanders Portal or the Infinity Base. Was that the Disney? I think that was the Disney rip-off of Skylanders. Never played it, couldn't afford it. Retro achievements. You log in. I've covered this, you should be an expert by now. There we go. I'm going to enable hardcore mode, and that's it. Advanced. So in here, I think most of this stuff, yeah, emulator speaks there, it's fine. So that's it for our config. So that's all good to go. So graphics. So again, we're going to change the video backend to Vulkan. Shader compilation mode, I leave as specialized, just the default one. Just because it's seems to do the job for me. You can compile shaders before starting, I tend to do that. So basically your games might take a little bit longer to load, but you shouldn't experience as much stuttering as it's trying to load in the textures as it needs them. Aspect ratio, you can leave on auto or you can force it to 16:9. I tend to leave it just on auto. And then if it does have the 16:9 compatibility, it will display in 16:9. So for enhancements in internal resolution, we're going to bump that up to 3 times to get that 1080p. Anti-aliasing, I don't tend to use, I've not really noticed it's needed. The same for anisotropic filtering. This is more for certain games where if you view stuff at an angle, it can look a little bit blurry. Don't really need it. Texture filtering, I leave on the default. Most of these just leave on the default until you really start getting into the weeds. I am, however, going to enable the widescreen hack, which, like I said, if it's available, it will use 16:9. And then we also have our hacks folder for those of you who are a bit braver than I. Don't think there's anything we need to cover in there. No. Statistics. No advanced. So if you have graphical mods or custom textures, then you can enable them here and pop them into the relevant folder. It does detail here which ones, and you need to make sure you use the game ID. So there we are. The GPU driver, you can choose the default for Dolphin. I've never really needed to use the Turnip one for this. However, you can just install the Turnip one. Like I said, I'll cover the Turnip driver as part of the Eden setup. Now, input. So for Gamecube, it's not too bad. For Wii is where it gets a little bit complicated. So I'm just going to use a standard controller. I'm going to tap the little settings cog. And then all I'm going to do is map my buttons. So the way I map a GameCube controller is positionally. So if you're familiar with a GameCube controller, it doesn't have the same layout as the Switch or the DS. Nintendo does not like consistency. So for example, whereas the B button is on the bottom on the Thor, on the GameCube controller, the B button was on the left. So the way my rule of thumb is Tony Hawk's. I played a ton of Tony Hawk's games on the GameCube, so my flip button is what is technically Y, but so my B is here, my grab is on the right. I'll go through this now. So for A, I just use the B button. For B, I use the Y button. For X, I use the A button. And for Y, I use the X button. Saying that sounds mental, but I assure you, if you're familiar with the GameCube, it works the best, in my opinion. For Z, I'm going to use R1, I think it was. And then for start, I'm just going to use the start button. Control stick, we're just going to map this. Again, when you're mapping analog sticks, do be careful in case you accidentally knock it in the wrong axis. If you're unsure, just try it again. And then the same for the C stick, our right stick. There we go. And triggers, we've got our L and our R. So, for the reason it's got LR and L analog, right analog, the GameCube had analog triggers where if you gently press them, it will still register as an input. Whereas if you press them all the way down, it's a digital input, so it's your L and your R. Kind of like your L1, R1, they're just clicky buttons. So what I do is I just set that down to the same axis. And then for our D-pad, just our normal D-pad controls. Nice and easy, up, down, left, right. I don't tend to set a microphone button, but you can if you want. You can do it to one of the L3 or R3, or your L2 button, still available. Sorry, your L1 button. Always connected. You can enable, doesn't really make a huge difference. Well, unless you're planning on taking this thing apart, then Godspeed. Now for the Wii input. So this gets a little bit funky. So we want to change our Wii remote to, we leave it on emulated Wiimote, and then we're gonna go down. So yeah, so our extension will be nunchuck. So I had a Wii, but I've never really emulated a Wii properly. So what I'm using is Russ's, again from Retro Game Core, his guide on setting up the button mapping for Wii emulation, because it's not the most mapping friendly layout. So for our buttons, our A button we are going to use as our B button. Our B button we're going to use as our Y button. Our 1 button we're going to use as our X button. And our 2 button we're going to use as our A button. Our minus button is just select. Our plus button is start. Home, again, we don't need to map. D-pad is D-pad. That's a nice easy one. Sideways toggle. Click L3. And I believe if you... Yeah, it's a toggle. So you press it and it'll flip the direction of the Wiimote. You can also enable the hold, but I wouldn't recommend it. Just use the toggle. And then I think if you enable both, it will toggle between them. And then for the nunchuck, what we're going to do... Oh, sorry, motion simulation. I don't know if he's done anything for pointing. This is where it gets. So for shake, he's mapped X, Y, and Z all to R1. So when it says, oh, mash the buttons or shake it, you mash it to simulate the axis. And then he's not done anything for tilt or swing. So most of these we're going to cover with a nunchuck. So yeah, in the nunchuck settings, for our C and Z button C, we're going to use L1, Z, L2, and our stick, we'll just use the left stick like it would be on a Wiimote. And then again for the extension, we'll just use R1 as well. We'll shake everything. And I think that is it. So, oh, it's for the infrared sensor, you mapped the right analog stick, so I'll just do that as well. So, I think that's our point. And then you can use the accelerometer or the gyro that's built into the device. So forgive me for not being the most versed on the Wii input, but it's a doozy. Okay, so now we're going to look at GameCube and Wii games. So just a note, I did just do a little test and try to boot these, and it kept giving me errors. If you get any errors where it's... what was the actual error it gave me? The error said, the failed to submit command buffer. This is an issue which can happen with Vulkan. In which case, you go to your settings, go to your graphics settings, and change your video backend to OpenGL, and then it seems to work. So if I boot up, say, F0... So this is pre-compiling the shaders, like I mentioned. So yeah, it's loaded the retro achievements. Now we'll get into a game, hopefully.
Machine, Falcon. Grab console default set.
So yeah, we've booted in, game looks good. I don't think this one has a widescreen patch, of course. But as you can see, it runs pretty flawlessly. So, I'm not very good at F0. I've not played it for 20 odd years. But yeah, so that's the GameCube game. So what we'll do is I'll run back out, exit emulation, and then we'll try a Wii game. So let's try Super Mario Galaxy. So So Wii achievements are coming to Retro Achievements. I believe they're due for release around March time. If you check out the Retro Achievements website, they usually do a little blog where they post updates and things like that. So do check that out if you're someone interested in the Retro Achievements scene. So it said press both A and B, and I forgot which one was which. So, whoa. So I'm using the gyro. So you might have more fun than me trying to get this bloody thing working. Well, the game boots, so I'm sure you'll have more success than me at Wii games. I do need to properly look at the Wii emulation. It's not something I use very often, as you can tell. So we'll leave Wii there for now, and then we'll jump over to a slightly simpler console, the Wii U. Okay, so now we're going to jump into Cemu, I believe it's pronounced, which is our Wii U emulator. So I'll flip back to my dual screen, because our top screen is going to be the TV, as it were, and our bottom screen will be our gamepad. So again, this is a specific fork of Cemu, which enables that dual screen, similar to MelonDS. So make sure you get the right one. So it doesn't come with much settings, unfortunately. So we're going to tap the three dots. I'm going to go into our settings. So for our general, so the first thing we're going to do is add our game path. So I'm going to find my ROMs folder. I think I only have the one for Wii U. There we go, we got our Zelda in there. And then gamepad position, I believe we can just leave that as is. For our input, we don't need the input overlay. Don't need any of that. The tap controller one, we're going to enable it as a Wii U gamepad. And then we're going to press set up all inputs and tap the controller. And as you can see, the auto mapping should work quite well for this. Just double check that it definitely has everything. There we go. I'm going to do the one controller because that's all I need. Asynchronous shaders, yes, we want that. VSync we'll leave off. And then does this give us access to the graphics renderer? Don't believe it does. So you can have the TV and the gamepad volume. I don't recommend having both because it can be a bit overkill. Overlay settings is disabled, that's fine. Account settings. So again, I've not looked too much into overlays to network play. So I'll do that. I'll cover that in a later video. So for we have graphics packs. So you can add additional graphics packs if you wish, but I don't have any to hand. So let's just boot up Zelda. So you'll see it's registered the top screen, but it hasn't registered the bottom screen. So what we need to do, if we press our back button, or swiping from the left, and then we go to show pad, and then we swipe again and press external pad screen, you'll see that it's jumps down to the bottom screen. So once we get into the game and we see the actual difference, so you'll see there is a little bit of slowdown whilst it compiles shaders. What we can do to mitigate that slightly is if we swipe down and then change our performance to high performance. We'll use Wii U gamepad. Set up a new save. Can't even spell my own name. It's been a long day of recording. So we just get into the game and we'll see the different screens working. There we are. So you can see on the bottom I've got my inventory screen, and then on the top we've got the TV screen, as it were. So one thing I'm also going to do is if you swipe, you can. So I'm going to exit out of here. And then what I'm going to do is if you go back into our settings and then to our overlay settings, I'm just going to untick where it says shader compiler, just so you don't get those little pop-ups in the corner telling you it's compiling the shaders. So pretty simple setup for the Wii U. I did actually have a Wii U, but I barely used it, so it's somewhere gathering dust. So yeah, Wii U. So now we're going to move on to the one that I imagine most of you have been waiting for, the Nintendo console. See you shortly. Okay, so we're back to single screen mode. So we're going to load up Eden, which is our emulator. So we'll open it up. So this one has a setup guide. Quite straightforward. So you're going to allow the notification permissions, and then, so if you watched the start of the video when I told you to get the firmware and the keys files, this is where we're going to need them. So first up, we're going to press our keys. And where did I put them? I think I left them in the BIOS. There we go. So in my BIOS folder, I've got the word there. So I'm going to open my prod.keys file. So make sure if you've downloaded it as a zip, you extract it. Otherwise, it won't work. And then for firmware, in that same folder, we've got our firmware, which can stay as a zip folder. So this will install the firmware. Should take a second. There we go. And for our games, we're going to point it to our ROMs folder. So I'll find it. There it is. We'll use that folder. We'll click allow. You can deep scan if you want. What deep scan means is if you have games within folders, it will search on an additional level. Whereas all mine, they're just in a folder. So we'll click OK. Then we'll hit next. So now let's get started. So it's found games I have. So first we're going to go into settings. We're going to go into our advanced settings. So for system, I don't use the docked mode for this because it has a considerable performance hit. It might work better for some games than others, but in my experience, it's not worth it. You can also do things like overclock the CPU. However, I've not yet really found a use for this in the games I've played because they do seem to run okay. Graphics, so I leave it at the default resolution, just 720p handheld or 1080p docked. You can bump it up to 1.5 if you want 1080p handheld, but it will have a considerable performance hit. So give it a try, see if it works, but don't expect too much. And then most of these I just leave on the default. So performance overlay, I turn this off. This is just an overlay for your GPU, CPU, that kind of thing. If you do want to see that kind of data, you can press the AYN button on your Thor, and it'll give you the display at the bottom with the temperatures and things like that, if that's something you want to keep an eye on. For me, I prefer to go off, how does the game feel? Does it feel sluggish? Is the device getting really hot? Rather than obsessing over numbers. So they have the device overlay. Don't need the device overlay because we've got a controller. Input overlay, same thing. Audio, don't touch. Most of these is fine. So our GPU driver settings. So we're going to configure this in our GPU driver manager shortly. So you can edit the app settings if you like. However, we will be using this through IISU. So what it'll do is it'll boot straight into the game from IISU. It'll skip this, so you don't need to customize the look of the app. I like the look of the app. I think it looks really snazzy, and it also fits the retro feel I'm going for. Controls are nice and easy. So we're going to use as a Pro controller. You can use the auto mapping, and it should just work perfect. Again, always double check. So we've got A, we've got B, we've got X, we've got Y, and these all look correct, plus and minus. You can set a capture if you want to. Not use as a capture, actually run out of buttons. But yeah, this all looks correct to me. So now we're going to go to our GPU driver manager. So when we go into this, by default, we'll be using the Qualcomm driver. That's the default driver for the AYN Thor. If we press fetch, it's going to load up the Turnip Drivers. So it'll give you the recommended driver here, Mr. Purple T23. I believe there's a T24 out, which I've been using, and that does seem to work fine. However, when people are talking about Turnip Drivers, this is what they're referring to. It's graphical drivers, which tend to work better because they're more geared towards emulation. So give it a try. So for Turnip Drivers, not every game will run better with a Turnip driver. Some of them run better with the system drivers. Some of them, it doesn't matter what you do, they just won't run at all. These are in active development, so like it recommends there T23, there's now T24. I imagine at some point there'll be T25 as well. So we're going to tap that. Oops, sorry, we're going to tap show downloads, and there it is. We're going to tap that link, and there we are. We're going to go back. It'll give you this warning, say, yeah, we've scrapped the Qualcomm stuff, so don't show again. And then make sure this is selected, and there we go. So you can manage your save data and folders like that if you wish. Most of this is fine. If you have updates and things like that, you can go on to manage Eden Data, and if you scroll down, you can use this to install game content. If you've got a folder of game updates or DLC or things like that, I think that's basically everything. Then you can do that. You can also install the amiibo keys, which are available online, which will emulate an amiibo. So if you're playing a game and it asks you to tap a certain amiibo, there are software keys out there which will emulate that for you. I tried it with a Link one and it worked, but good luck tracking them down because they can be a bit of a nightmare to find. So yeah, so let's boot up. We'll try Big Hops. I've been playing some Big Hops. Try a new game that's come out. It's pretty decent. Recommend it. And then hopefully this should run. There we go.
Ha, there's more.
So
beyond
if
the
you
forest.
don't use the Turnip Driver, I noticed when I first set this up a while ago, I tried to launch Animal Crossing, and there was a lot of kind of black shimmers over a lot of the graphics. So switching to the Turnip Driver resolved that problem. Again, they're not perfect, they won't work for everything, but when they work, you'll notice a considerable difference. So here we go. Little frog dude.
Ugh, what a weird dream.
Looks great,
Hurry up and
runs
eat
great.
breakfast.
Haven't really spotted any graphical glitches as of yet. I'm gonna eat a sandwich,
There, you will take these,
and then I'm gonna go and do the same thing and have a sandwich, and then I'll come back, and then we'll look at the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for, IISU, and getting all the emulators and all the games set up, and now we're gonna make them look beautiful. So I will see you shortly. Okay, so we've got all our emulators, we've got our games ready. Now let's make them look pretty. So there are many different front ends. I've did a video guide where I went through most of them and I looked at their kind of pros and cons. However, for this example, I'm going to use what I imagine will be a lot of people's favourites, and that is IISU. So first thing I'm going to do is go to Google Chrome. I'll post this link in the description. So what I've done is I've gone to the IISU network GitHub, and they've just launched this public alpha 0.0.5. If you want to get involved in assisting the development of IISU, if you sign up to their Ko-Fi, you get access to their Discord, and you get early access to some of the pre-releases. So if this is something that you like, do check that out. So we're going to scroll down until we get to our releases. There it is. There's our alpha APK. We're going to download that. Give it a moment. There we go. We're going to install it. So now it's done, we're going to open it up. So this has a very simple to follow setup wizard, but we'll go through it anyway. So we'll just tap through this. So we can enable they call it the DS mode. So that basically has the home kind of down here on the bottom screen with all your apps and shortcuts. And at the top, you get the artwork side. So I like that style, so I'm going to enable that. Press next. So you can have a light or a dark theme. So I'll switch it to light for now. I normally tend to go for the dark, but I'll start with the light and then I'll show you the dark afterwards. Then we'll hit next for our ROMs folder. So for this, we want to pick the root of the ROMs folder. So this folder here with all the system folders in it. Because what it's going to do is it's going to scan through and it's going to basically add all the games to its library. So we'll allow that. Give that a moment. So it'll scan through all the folders, and then as you can see, if we scroll down this list, we'll see where it has found, hopefully. There we go, so it's found some games there. It knows the emulator that it's using, bearing in mind that some of these we might have to change. So if you try and open a game and it doesn't load or it doesn't work, this is something we'll need to check. So that's fine, we'll go next. So retro achievements. So for this one, we're not going to be using our password, we're going to be using the API key. So at the start of the video, when I showed you how to get the API key, you can use that. So I'm just going to copy and paste it from my PC into there. There we go. Ooh. Make sure you validate it, and it should give you, there we go. Then we'll go next. So this is quick access. So this is by default, if you've seen the concept stuff for IISU, at the bottom on the home screen, there'll be app shortcuts. So you can go through and then you can pick and choose which ones you want. So I'm going to enable just a couple that I'll cover. So Bifrost, I'm going to enable Chrome. I won't enable any of the emulators because for the most part we won't be opening them directly because we've already set them up. I'll open Obtainium, Pixel Guide, Settings, Solid Explorer, and that's it. So we'll go next. So what it's going to do is scan through those games and prepare some assets. Now it's going to go through each system and it's going to ask us to generate the retro achievement hashes. What this means is that each game on retro achievements has a hash that it refers to. This is going to generate hashes for all those games and use it to cross-reference and say, is it this game? Is it available on retro achievements? And then that's how it generates the little retro achievements icons you might have seen in the trailer or the concept. So for each system, we're going to generate the hashes. Give it a second to do all that. It's just going to ask you for each one, so just keep hitting generate hashes. I'm hoping with the update you can just hit this once rather than per system. Like I said, it is still in alpha, so you might get little freezes and things like this, or some stuff might bug out, but in my testing, it has worked well enough to use. So there we go. So now what it's going to do is some onboarding tasks. So we can run it in the background and have a look, or what I can do is I can come back once it's done and then we'll have a proper look at IISU. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so welcome to IISU. You've seen the trailers, you've watched the presentation, you've seen the screenshots. Now you've got your hands on it. So we'll take a quick walk through it. I'll show you some settings and then you're free to finally get involved and have a play around. So at the bottom, we have our app drawer. So this is where you saw that I'd enabled some settings earlier. And then if we either press the right bumper or you can just tap the little controller. So by default, the files that it's found, it has created little folders for. So if we go in, you can see we've got our games. There's no artwork yet. We'll get to that shortly. So it's found our games and it will also tell you which one. So if you notice here, so I'm in Gamecube, it's trying to use the Retroarch Dolphin core. I don't want it to use that. I want it to use the external version of Dolphin. I'll cover that shortly. We've also got achievements. So you can see from my profile, the games I've been playing, the ones I've mastered. And then if we click into one of those, you'll see more details about the achievements. Like the same as you would on an Xbox or a PlayStation or Steam. The friends list isn't yet active, so it'll just skip that. And then at the end, we also have a folder for all our apps and our emulators. And if you have any Android-specific games, like ones you bought off the Google Play Store, they'll appear here as well. I don't, but if you do, they'll be there. So, yeah, that's IISU. So, let's sort out these consoles. So the first thing I'm going to do is double check that all the emulators are pointing at the right one. So it doesn't try and load something in an emulator either I don't have installed or I don't want it to use. So it says Retroarch default for Game Boy. I don't know what the Retroarch default it thinks it's using. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to press start whilst hovering over the Game Boy folder. I'm going to go to console settings, and then I'm going to edit the console settings. And where it says emulator, I'm going to go here. I can see it's using Retroarch, which I want. It's using the emulator variant. So I want to change this to the com.retroarch.arch64, which is the version we have installed. And then for the core, I'm using Gambate. There we go. I'm going to double check the same for Game Boy Advance. So that's using the MGBA core. That's fine. That's what I want. I am just going to check that it's using the correct version of Retroarch, however. So edit the console settings, go down to emulator, and then we'll just change that over, leaving the core as is. And then we'll do the same for those, because if I try and boot this, will it load? Oh, so it does still load. So you don't necessarily need to change it. As long as the core's right, it will work. So I'm just going to exit out of this. One thing I forgot to do as well, which I will do shortly, is disable the touchscreen overlay for Retroarch. So that's my fault. So for GameCube, I don't want to use Retroarch, I want to use Dolphin. So we'll go to console settings, edit the console settings, go to emulator, and we will choose Dolphin Standalone. So any of the external ones that we've done separately are referred to as standalone. There we are. So this is the Sega Genesis, so it doesn't yet have its own system icon. Like I said, this is an alpha. If you're part of the Discord, people are posting all sorts of icons and themes. There's some really great stuff in there. Check it out. But for Genesis, so the core I use for Genesis is the GX Plus Wide. So I'm just going to knock that over. So 3DS is defaulted to the standalone Azahar, that's fine, I'll leave that as is. N64, it's using the Mupen 64 Next core, which isn't the one I wanted. So I'm going to change that to... my core doesn't seem to be there. So some of these might not work properly, like if I try and open a N64 game. Oh, it has flipped over to the correct core, even though it wasn't pointed at. Like I said, it's still in alpha, so these type of things are to be expected. Whilst I'm in Retroarch, I'm just going to tap that little Retroarch button at the top. I'm going to go to on-screen overlay, and I'm going to just untick that. And then what am I going to do, folks? I'm going to go to the config file, and I'm going to save, because we're in Retroarch, remember? You forgot, didn't you? Serves you right for skipping chapters. So then we're going to quit. And if I just load up a game again, you'll see that overlay is not there anymore. So we'll just close off Retroarch. Oop. Go back to IISU. So DS is loading the standalone MelonDS, which is what I want. NES is using the Meson core, that's fine. E3SX2 standalone, PSP. Oh no, so that's using the Retroarch PPSSPP core. Again, don't want it. You can have it. If you do subscribe to PPSSPP Gold, you do need to make sure that you point it to the Gold version, because even though they're technically the same app, they are two separate app IDs, so it won't find it. PlayStation is... So this is going to the Beetle PSX core. So I'm going to change this to Duckstation Standalone. And then that... Oh, we've got some Super Nintendo, SNES 9X, that's fine. So Kenji NX we're not using, we're using Eden. I tried to use Kenji NX and I wasn't a fan. There we go, Eden Standalone. Make sure it's the regular one, not the nightly one. And then we'll back out. Then Wii is using, again, it's gone for the Dolphin core. I believe you can also set these on a per ROM basis. You go to ROM options, and then... Ooh. Or maybe you can't, maybe I dreamt it. individual console options. There we go. So select custom emulator, and if you, for example, if you have, say, Azahar set up for 3DS and one game works better on Citra MMJ, you can have that specific game boot in one, but by default, the rest will boot in the other. So we'll go back out, we'll go to just the overall console settings, and then we'll change that to the standalone. And Wii U, it's doing the standalone CD, that's great. So now, let's get some pretty artwork. So we're going to press start again. We're going to go to where it says Scraper All Consoles. I think it should be Scrape All Consoles. We're going to press it. So we have 4 possible options for scraping. So if you watch the start, you'll know that I covered Steam Grid DB and Screen Scraper. So IGDB is built in. However, I've found that it doesn't always necessarily get the best artwork. Screen Scraper is by far my favourite. Steam Grid DB is decent, gets some really nice artwork. The Games DB, I didn't have a great lot of success with. So what I tend to do is I use Screen Scraper first. If there's any it hasn't matched for whatever reason, give the others a try and then see what happens. You might need to do a few passes to get all the artwork, especially if you've got some more obscure games. So we'll go for Screen Scraper, auto select the best match, and we'll only get the missing data. So it hasn't asked me to sign in, so it might not actually find anything. It hasn't given any notifications. However, it doesn't seem to be doing much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to IISU settings. Oop. And then in data, I'm going to configure Screen Scrapper, as it's called in here. So if I just enter my credentials, no peeking. Nope. So I've entered my credentials there. And if I back out, and then if I can do the same thing for my Steam Grid DB API key. So I'm connected to my computer, so I'm just going to copy it over like that. That hasn't worked. Oh, wonderful. I'll leave that for now, but yeah, just copy your Steam Grid API key. And then if I give it another try. It should, hopefully, scrape some artwork. So I'm going to leave this running, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look once it's all scraped and everything looks really, really nice. Okay, so our scraping has done. So I don't have a ton of games, but scraping can still take a while. So if I open up here, you can see we've got the box art, we've got the logos, the backdrops, screenshots. We've got absolutely all sorts in here. This is just the basic setup as well. So I've not really delved into a lot of the custom ideas. So we can see here, some of them haven't quite scraped. So you can, if you do have games like this, you can hover over them, press start, and then if you go over to the ROM, pardon me. Try that again. We'll go over to the ROM options, and then we can do scraper options, and then we can try another source. So if I try, for example, just a quick one, I will try we'll try Steam Grid DB, see if we get anything, and then we'll get the missing data. So it's not found it. So unfortunately, sometimes that's just the way she goes, but that's the way to manually scrape games individually. So we have all our artwork there, and then if I go to our settings, our appearance settings, and then change the theme to dark, we can have a quick look at the dark. So there aren't native dark mode icons yet. They are coming. I have used them, but I had to install them manually by overwriting existing files. So it is something that will be coming, and there will be a lot more theme management. However, what you can do for now in our IISU settings is if you make a theme using your own assets, you can create a new theme. You can set custom home custom home backgrounds for light and dark modes, and then your details. You can export that theme, and then when you upgrade IISU, just in case anything breaks, you can re-import that as a zip. Or if you're in the Discord, once users start submitting their own themes as zips, you can download them and then steal their hardware, which is what I plan to do, because there is a ton of stuff you can do in here. There is also compatibility with video backgrounds. It does support MP4. However, I believe the MP4 is quite sluggish, so I believe the best ones to use are GIFs or WebPs, I think they are, or WebVs, Web something. So they're the best ones to use. Scrim, you can change the opacity of the scrim. That's like the background image, so you can bump it up a little bit, and that gives you a kind of vignette feel. So have a play around with that, and then see how you get on. And for title options, if you want to hide the title of the cores, for example, you can do that. You can hide the title of the ROMs if you just want the logos. You can, there we go. So we just have it like that. I think I'll leave it like that. I quite like it. And then we have the dual screen display. So if you wanted to, for example, hide the system, you'll see the top right disappears. The friends, obviously the friends isn't active yet, so you can hide it for now until it is. And then the same for the achievement summary when that comes up when you're highlighting a game. And then you have plenty of options to play with. So one thing you can also do is you can set the brightness from within each. So the same as you could if you press the AYN button and do it this way. I believe this was developed in direct contact with AYN. Whether or not they'll bring in a feature to remap that AYN button directly to this screen, I don't know. It'd be good if it could. It's early days. So that's just a very quick look at IISU. So there'll be a couple of little things that I'll cover just before I go. So you might have noticed that I had this weird bar on the right hand side. So to get rid of that, what we want to do is go to swipe down and then I go across, and we're looking for the floating icon. So you can disable it. I did a video covering this in my tips video, so if you want more detail on this, don't disable it. We're just going to change the opacity, and then you won't see that ugly white line. And then also what I'm going to do is in my settings, this white swipe bar at the bottom, I'm going to get rid of that as well by going to our system, gestures, system navigation, tapping the little settings cog next to gesture navigation, and then just getting rid of that, and you'll see it's vanished. So there we are. That is a very in-depth look at your complete start to end Thor setup. I'm going to go for some food and a nice long bath, because this has been a long day recording all these for you. If this video helped you out, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe. Tell your friends, check out all the other videos. I've got more in-depth guides on each of the emulators. I've got some tips, some must-have apps, some deep dives. I cover front-end updates, app updates, all sorts. So get involved. I'm always replying to comments. And tell your friends, and I will see you next time after a long, long nap. Take it easy.